Hi everyone, welcome to an exciting transmedia-centered edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be talking with an author and creative team who have been recently collaborating with me on a chapter for a book focused on literacy in the world of transmedia. On this episode, glad to be talking with Dr. Sean Connors, and is it Dr. Mr.?
Yeah,
Yeah, Mr. Dylan Hale, both educators, creators, and authors. Thank you so much for joining.
thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
A pleasure, a pleasure. The book chapter is called From Gotham to Gatsby, and the subtitle is something along the lines of Transmedia Storytelling and Creative Play, I believe
hmm
is right.
hmm
Yeah. So I invited you to a chapter in the book, and you took this in a direction that was really interesting to me, and really enjoyed what you put together with this. I'm curious about what inspired your approach.
So I think I can start this addressing this question, if you don't mind, Dylan, and I'll let
Yeah, go
you
for it.
jump in. So we talk about in the chapter, um, as a kid, comics are a big part of my reading life at home,
Hmm.
especially superhero comics, but they were really something that was discouraged in school at that time in the 1970s. And it's interesting because I would, at home, pop culture in general was a big part of my creative life, like telling stories and acting out plays. They would all draw on characters and storylines that I knew from comic books and television and movies and things like that. And that was something that was, again, really discouraged in school. And, I think it's interesting to look at the course of my life of being really into creative things as a child. I was kind of like a little weirdo, I suppose. I would make my own comics, and I remember doing a Star Wars adaptation with Muppet puppets that I own, Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy and Rolf and all of that. But as I got older and went through school, I'm not going to say my interest in those things subsided, but the opportunities for me to be creative subsided considerably. And it wasn't until much later that I sort of returned to my interest in writing and storytelling outside of school and sort of rekindled that passion. And I teach a course on um, YA graphic memoir and the art of visual storytelling that I
Hmm.
put together. And Dylan was a graduate student. He enrolled in the course, and got to know him and familiar with his artistic work. And, we started to talk about how can we pool our talents, our respective talents here in the service of working together and trying to produce a comic. And the result was the chapter that we came up with for your book.
Love that. I love that. Uh, Dylan, what was your thought and response when Sean reached out to you with the idea?
I was all for it. I'm a very yes and kind of person. No stone left unturned. You never know where opportunities are going to take you. Plus, I just really enjoy working with Sean as an author because so many authors that I've worked with in the past, they don't know a lot about the visual aspect of storytelling. They just think, oh, you depict what's in the text. It's like, well, yes, but there's more to it. I like to tell people that I'm illustrating what's in between the lines, what you haven't said, but still falls within the world. And but to write in an academic sense, or at least illustrate for an academic uh, book chapter, that was something that I kind of explored vaguely in my thesis, was like making academic material more accessible to people. Because as I was writing my thesis, um, I was having people read over it and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, oh no. So I always think visuals are a great way to do that. We all can look at something and we understand what's going on with it, but maybe the words that we all use to describe it are very different. So I was all for it when he reached out. I was like, yes, let's do this. This sounds amazing.
I love that idea of something being accessible, both as far as not behind kind of a gatekeeping system, but also in terms of something you can understand. I feel like that's one of the misconceptions about academic writing is that you've sort of arrived when no one knows what you're talking about anymore. Which in other parts of the world we call madness. So it's good
True.
to engage that way. Sean, of course, you're associate professor
Mhm.
at the University of Arkansas, and I'm curious about how the chapter aligns with both of your visions of literacy and thinking about literacy or literacies.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, it's interesting, sort of, and it'll seem tangential, but it connects to that about thinking about literacy. In the courses that I've taught, I've really pushed the importance of multiple literacies, that
Mhm.
we don't live in a world where the written word is our only means of communicating with other people, that we increasingly have the ability to use images, for example, as well, and song and music, so forth. And so I really push my students to become comfortable with expressing themselves in other modalities. And then this project came around. And I had reached out, Jason, you and I had talked about the book
Mhm.
chapter taking the form of a comic. I'd reached out to Dylan, and Dylan was fully on board with that. And I sat down to start writing a script for this thing and was frozen, just frozen. And for weeks. And I reached out to a friend who's a novelist and who also writes comics in Ohio. And I said, Tyler, I'm stuck. I don't know what, I'm like writer's block. And he said, yeah, he said, you're definitely stuck. And we started to talk about why am I stuck? And I was thinking, part of it was I was like so consumed with what is this thing going to look like? What
Mhm.
are the images? What are the page layouts going to be? And I remember he said to me, you're working with a professional illustrator. That's Dylan's job, right? Like
Yeah.
you need to let that go and write a script. And he said, if the problem is the script, do something you're more familiar with, right? Like a script for a television, show, almost sort of a thing, as opposed to writing a script for comics. And once I got rolling on that and sort of realized that as Dylan was saying, yeah, I don't have to be responsible for the images. I'm responsible for the written portion of the story. And once I was able to do that, I really, it freed me up in a way that I hadn't anticipated. And then, I was able to hand the script over to Dylan, basically say, run with this. What do
Mhm.
you see?
Mhm.
Bring your creative vision to it. And he did things, he brought a vision to it that I would not have anticipated, things that I would not have chosen. So kind of coming back full circle, it was really eye-opening to me. And I think for me, it reinforced the idea that I really have to be supportive of and nurturing of students when we ask them to step outside of their comfort zone, what they do and what they're accustomed to doing. When we teach writing in schools, we seldom, it seems, focus on like what it means to nurture creativity, what it means to nurture people seeing themselves as creatives. So for me, on that aspect of it, it's something that going back into school this fall, I feel a heightened sense of responsibility to be attentive to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's something that I always, Sean, I really admired, like when I took your course, because I was taking it, I was the only graduate student in the course. And then as everyone was introducing themselves, I found out, okay, I'm the only art person here, the only person with an artistic background. So this is going to be really interesting, as well, just as with that background, but then also as an art teacher, when you talk about, uh, we need students to see themselves as creative. And in the course, you did that, and it's something that I'm reflecting on quite a bit is because I do that with students all the time. I'm like, yeah, guys, just give it a shot. I try to let them know that, hey, I know you guys are artists. It's, a low bar, so to speak, just to make them feel better. And it never worked for me. So I'm constantly thinking back about that class, like, what was it that Sean did that just like everybody relaxed and was like, yeah, let's do this.
Mhm.
So that's something that I've always I think about that quite a bit, that two different approaches, both with the same goal, trying to get students to see that. So,
Yeah, and then I'll add Dylan like held me to my words, because as after I'd given him the script, he said, "Oh, so there's this section where in the script your character is illustrating Gatsby. Why don't you illustrate these panels and send them to?" And I was like, "Oh man, all right, well, I've got to practice what I preach, so I'm getting out my sketchbook and spent days and days working on those." But I think Dylan's point about, yeah, like so many times we ask our students to do things that they're uncomfortable with. And it's important for us as teachers, I think, to be made uncomfortable sometimes as well, if for no other reason than to be able to understand and empathize with what we ask our students to do.
definitely.
I'm curious about the creative process on your side of the project, Dylan, and also, if I may take a question here, any particular comics or otherwise artistic influences that you'd like to mention?
So as far as artistic influences with comics, I wasn't really super into comics or graphic novels until I took Sean's course and uh, really engaged with them in that way. Reading a graphic novel once a week, it was a great exposure to that field. Uh,
Mhm.
but prior to that, I still loved illustrating. I did more in children's books. And so that was really more where my mind was in terms of like take this one scene, and uh, condense it, so to speak. But whereas with a comic, it's moment by moment almost. And Scott McCloud talks about this like a film reel,
Mhm.
stills of film. You're trying to create this moving image of sorts where it's not moving and allowing readers to take part in what they kind of in the creation of it, in the gutters, that in between space. So those are things that I'm always thinking about in the creative process is where are those hinge points, those page turning moments, those instances where it's like, oh, I need to turn the page. I need to continue reading with this thing, at least physically, right? And so those are things that I look for. I'm thinking about what sort of layouts, like what's the pacing of this section versus this section, as well as the whole story. So it's a lot of, for me, it's looking at the entire thing, but then also as well the little pieces, those little moments that really bring it to life. The story, I should say, bring it to life. So that's kind of my creative process. It's very free flowing, but also targeted as well in a way. Uh, so yeah, that's me and my kind of the creative process for me. I don't know if there's anything more specific you want to know about it or
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you answered that perfectly. Um, anything else on the creative process from either of you before we talk about a few last points?
No, I think that you'd asked Dylan about style. And as we were working on this chapter, we would periodically talk back to our work with students. And one of the things that Dylan pointed out was the importance of encouraging students to look at a variety of our authors or artists' drawing styles.
Hmm.
Dylan, you want to talk about maybe why you thought that was important?
yeah, absolutely. So whenever I have students that are going to go off to art school or wanting to develop that, themselves as an artist, uh, they're always asking like, who do I need to look at? And my answer is look at who you like
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
it's natural to engage with what you like. If you've ever had to do anything that you despise or hate or you just don't enjoy, it's the process isn't going to be fun, right? And that's one of the most important things is that you enjoy the process. So I'm always telling them to look at what they like, look at what you like visually, aesthetically, if it's a certain style depiction, manga versus anime versus, I kind of go with the Scooby Doo style of little beady eyes. Because that just, that makes me happy. Scooby Doo was a big part of my life.
Yeah.
And but also it keeps you from pigeonholing yourself, as I like to say. Um, when you are able to depict a lot of different styles or have a flexibility in your own style, you're more apt to engage with more people. versus where if you were just drawing in one style, like I only draw this way and I only use this media or whatever the scenario is, you are waiting for either a person, a story, whatever. You're waiting for that one particular thing to come to you. Whereas when you have those multiple styles, it's like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do it this way. We could do it this way, and it provides you more opportunities. Plus, you also learn more, and that's something that I would say is the more important part. I mean, the fun part, but also learning. Uh, so I would say that's the importance of like having those multiple styles, or at least engaging with things that maybe aren't necessarily your thing, broadening your horizons a little bit.
Yeah, I remember talking with the cartoonist P. Craig Russell about this,
Mhm.
and I asked him, so so much of being an artist or a writer as well is finding your style. And I said to him, how do you find, as a visual artist, how do you find your style? And I remember he said, it's just a matter of looking at other people's work and looking at their work. And he described it as almost like all this stuff is coming into the hopper, and over time you're working your way through it and you're blending things, and what comes out is your unique style. And it's very similar to when we talk, what do we tell kids about writing? If you want to be a writer, read
Yeah.
and read and read and read, right? And what Dylan is saying about the equivalent of finding other people's art and spending time thinking about their style and why do you like what you like. I mean, all of that I think is incredibly important.
But I really appreciated the response that you both had with the chapter invitation, and being a book about transmedia storytelling, to actually present a chapter drawing on those elements, literally drawing on the elements, was great to see, and just really rewarding as a reader. So it sounds like it was rewarding as a collaboration for the two of you as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, curious by means of a final official question, we can, of course, hit anything that we might have missed that you want to make sure to
Mhm.
mention. But I always like to give space for resources to be shared, for
Mhm.
people to learn a little bit more. So anything on comics creating education that you'd like to share with listeners as far as resources?
Sure, I've got a couple works that I can share. Comics specific, comics creating specific. Two books that I found really, really helpful in my teaching have been Ivan Brunetti's Cartooning Philosophy and Practice,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
largely because he incorporates lots of quote unquote simple exercises that teachers can use in a classroom to get kids drawing and thinking about drawing. And equally helpful for me has been Linda Berry's Making Comics. My friend
Yeah.
Tyler Weaver introduced me to that. And that was really pivotal in reframing how I thought about getting students to approach visual storytelling in my classroom. And again, I like that book so much because it's hands-on. It's a series of exercises that you can do with students to get them comfortable taking risks and making visual art. And then I also want to plug just a couple of works on creativity and fostering creativity. Ronald Bagetto, who studies creativity in education at Arizona State University, has a book that I read this past year titled Beautiful Risks, Having the Courage to Teach and Learn Creatively. And in it, he makes a distinction between creativity with a capital C and creativity with a little c. And creativity with a capital C, he argues, is the people who are doing this professionally for a living, making art for a living. And then he contrasts that with capital creativity with a little c, which he argues all of us are capable of being creative, and that we can see that and we can look for ways to be creative in our daily lives. And the other one that I really like is um, the Creative Act by the music producer Rick Rubin, who's worked with like everybody from like Jay-Z to Sheryl Crow to the Dixie Chicks, I think. And it's just a series of very short meditative chapters on what it is to be a creative and how we can nurture our creativity and think about the creative process. And it's been a really valuable resource, I think would be a resource that would resonate with a lot of teachers.
Awesome.
Those are some good ones. I'm gonna have to check out who was it? The one that you just said, the creativity with a large capital C and a lowercase
Oh,
c.
Ronald Bagato.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out because
Yeah.
I love that. I talk about capital C's and lowercase c's all the time in my classroom. I'm like, wait a second, someone else uses this phrase. Love
Yeah.
it. Um, for me, resources, two big ones, really anything from Scott McCloud in terms of like understanding comics, making comics, reinventing comics. That entire series is just uh, whether you're new or you're in the depths of comics, I feel like it's just they're helpful resources. Especially as an outsider, Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, that was our text for Sean's class. And I'm like, oh, this is perfect. This is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But then also Andrea Kantrowitz's drawing thoughts because my background in undergrad was drawing, so that was like my studio focus. And to hear someone talk about drawing, connected to the idea of writing and just visual communication in general, uh, and it being that thing that we all started out doing as children, whether it be scribbles or attempts at artistry, whatever it was. Um, she talks about that connection of drawing being a very human thing. And I think that's something that pairs along with the creative aspect that so many people are like, no, I'm not creative, or I can't draw, therefore I'm not creative. There's such a stigma around that. So those two authors in particular, I think they do a really good job of kind of starting to break down that wall. Um, for outsiders especially. I turn students to that all the time, and then they come back and be like, "Yeah, that book changed my life." I'm like, "It really changed your life?" I mean, I'm glad, but okay, wow.
Well, wonderful, and glad to share the chapter. It was a joy to read on the editing side, and I appreciate the conversation. Thank you both for taking the time to talk through it. Have we missed anything that you want to make sure to share before we close out?
No, I just want to say thank you for having us and thank you for doing this podcast too, because I think
Thank you.
these opportunities to think about the relevance of comics and other forms of media and storytelling to education is just vitally important. There definitely is a need for creativity in education in this country.
Yes, completely
Uh,
agree with that statement.
a pleasure to be in touch with you both, and glad to be in the same line of thinking about creativity and literacy.